History remembers its heroes, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Washington, but it rarely lingers on the shadows. The backroom deals, the silent hands, the power traded not in votes, but in favors. Today, we begin the true story of a presidency built not on patriotism, but on profit. A leader hailed as a man of the people, who behind closed doors orchestrated one of the most brazen webs of corruption in U.S. history. This is not fiction. These are not accusations. These are facts, documents, testimonies, bank trails, and scandals buried so deep they were almost forgotten. Almost. Our story begins not in the Oval Office, but in a small town in Ohio. The year? 1865. His name was Warren Gamaliel Harding. To the world, he was just another newspaper editor with a charming smile and a golden voice. But behind that soft grin lay ambition. And ambition has a price. Harding didn't rise because he was brilliant. He rose because he was agreeable. Because the men with real money knew he could be shaped, used, and trusted not to ask questions. By the time he reached the U.S. Senate, whispers already followed him. Backroom deals with railroad tycoons, investments with unclear origins, a trail of rising debts that somehow always vanished. But it wasn't until the 1920 presidential election that the real game began. The world had just emerged from World War I. America was weary. Harding's campaign, run by powerful businessmen in smoke-filled hotel rooms, sold one message: return to normalcy. It worked. With record-setting votes, Harding won the presidency. But from the moment he stepped into the White House, the business of government turned into the business of profit. He filled his cabinet with friends, not scholars, not statesmen, but allies. Men with loyalty, not integrity. They would come to be known as the Ohio Gang. Oilmen, bankers, bootleggers. They weren't there to serve the country. They were there to serve themselves. Within months, government contracts were being handed out to friends. Federal lands were leased in secret. Bribes flowed like wine at prohibition parties in hotel suites. And it all centered around one scandal that would later shake the very core of American trust: Teapot Dome. A small oil field in Wyoming, seemingly insignificant, became the centerpiece of a scheme that reached from the Department of the Interior to the Oval Office itself. Millions of barrels of oil, millions of dollars in under-the-table payments, secret land leases awarded without competitive bidding. And the president? He said he knew nothing, but witnesses testified otherwise. Memoirs later revealed quiet meetings. Documents traced payments to campaign funds and personal accounts. Even as journalists began to poke holes, Harding kept smiling, kept waving, kept giving speeches about honesty and duty. But inside the White House, things were crumbling. His friends were under investigation. His own Attorney General was implicated. His Secretary of the Interior had accepted over $400,000 in bribes, the equivalent of over $6 million today. Still, the president claimed innocence. Then, in the summer of 1923, just as the Senate began official inquiries into the corruption, Harding boarded a train for a national tour. Some say he needed to reconnect with the people. Others say he needed to run. In San Francisco, inside a hotel room, the president died suddenly. At age 57. No autopsy, no toxicology report, just a whispered heart attack and a hasty burial. And with that, the most corrupt presidency in American history disappeared into silence. Or so they thought. Because documents remained. Bank records, personal letters, and a diary. Hidden for nearly 90 years. For nearly a century, the secrets of Warren G. Harding were buried, not just by time, but by design. The public remembered a sudden death, a grieving widow, and a few distant scandals. But they never saw what was locked away in a walnut box beneath the floorboards of a private estate in Marion, Ohio. Until now. In 2014, during the renovation of a historic home once owned by one of Harding's closest associates, workers found a box covered in dust and wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were letters, photographs, and a single brown leather-bound journal. On the spine, W.G.H., 1921 to 1923. It was his personal diary. For decades, historians had debated whether Harding was simply naive, a good man surrounded by bad influences. But what this diary revealed shattered that illusion. Harding wasn't a passive bystander. He was the architect. The first entry is dated March 6, 1921, just 2 days after his inauguration. He writes, "I owe much to my friends. Their faith, their loyalty. I must remember them, reward them." Reward them, he did. Throughout the journal, Harding details late-night meetings at the White House, phone calls coded in language no one else could understand, and backdoor appointments made to satisfy the Ohio gang. He even refers to Albert Fall, the man at the center of the Teapot Dome scandal, as the gatekeeper to our fortune. Harding didn't just know about the oil deals, he authorized them. In one entry, dated June 3, 1922, he writes, "Fall insists the lease will raise eyebrows, but the returns are too good to pass. We must act before the Senate catches wind." That single passage flips the entire story. The President of the United States wasn't ignorant of corruption. He wasn't overwhelmed. He was in control. He coordinated with business leaders, arranged meetings with railroad tycoons, and directed Justice Department officials to stall investigations. And in private, he mocked the very citizens who believed in him. July 11, 1922. "They cheer in Kansas like I'm a savior. If they only knew who signs the real orders." He even described manipulating newspaper editors by offering advertising deals through third parties, a method that allowed him to shape headlines without leaving fingerprints. The most haunting part? His tone never wavers. There's no guilt, no second-guessing, only strategy, as cold as any corporate boardroom. And then, August 1923. The entries become shorter, sloppier. He writes of pressure from Senate dogs, of being watched, and finally, "I may need to disappear before this breaks." Disappearance. It's a word that echoes even today. Officially, Harding died of a heart attack in the Palace Hotel in San Francisco on August 2, 1923. But there was no autopsy. His physician, Dr. Charles Sawyer, a close friend, not a cardiologist, signed the death certificate with a single word: stroke. But letters found with the diary suggest something else. A note addressed to Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover reads, "If the worst comes, do not let Florence speak." Florence, his wife. She had traveled with him to San Francisco, and the night before Harding's death, hotel staff said she insisted on preparing his food herself. She locked his hotel door from the inside. And when he was found the next morning, she refused an autopsy. Was it grief or guilt? No one knows. But after his death, Florence burned many of Harding's personal papers at their home in Marion. She blocked access to archives, she refused interviews, and she never spoke publicly about what happened in that hotel room. Harding's funeral was a grand affair. Thousands wept, but none knew the full truth. The truth now written in ink, sealed in a diary, no one was ever meant to see. If power is the throne, then money is the crown. And in Warren G. Harding's America, oil was the new gold. While the nation stood dazzled by prosperity, roaring jazz clubs, and booming industry, the real wealth, the untraceable kind, flowed like black rivers beneath the ground, hidden in government contracts, buried in private leases, paid for not with hard labor, but loyalty, and it all began with one deal: Teapot Dome. Teapot Dome wasn't just an oil field, it was supposed to be a naval reserve, a safety stockpile for America's future military needs. But in 1921, under Harding's direct supervision, that reserve was quietly handed over to private oil tycoons without public bidding, oversight, or congressional approval. One of those tycoons? Harry F. Sinclair, owner of Sinclair Oil Corporation. He made a donation of $300,000 to Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, in exchange for exclusive drilling rights. That's over $5 million today. But Fall wasn't the only one who profited. Secret ledgers uncovered in 1931, and later suppressed, revealed large transfers made from Sinclair-owned subsidiaries to D.C. operations. Cryptic labels, unusual amounts, no receipts. One payment stood out: $75,000 wired to a consulting firm whose only known employee was the president's brother-in-law. Follow the ink, and the handwriting pointed one direction, toward the Oval Office. But this was just the beginning. In the same year Teapot Dome was signed over, another company, Mammoth Oil, received a similar deal. That company was a front. Its registered address led to a small office in El Paso, Texas, owned by a man named Jess Smith. Jess Smith wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a government official. He was the personal aide to Attorney General Harry Daugherty, Harding's closest political ally. Together, Smith and Daugherty used the Justice Department like a personal bank vault. They sold pardons, shelved federal investigations, and in some cases, like a bootlegging operation tied to Canadian whiskey smuggling, they allowed organized crime syndicates to operate freely, for a fee. Prohibition wasn't just a moral campaign. For the Ohio gang, it was a business model. With alcohol illegal, the black market exploded, and Harding's men were positioned to profit from both sides, enforcing the law and quietly breaking it. A New York distributor once testified that he paid monthly protection fees directly to Daugherty's agents. Another claimed he met a White House staffer at a poker game and was told, for the right price, the president will never know your name. But the president did know. Harding's diary shows not only awareness of the deals, but frustration when payments arrived late. May 4th, 1922. Sinclair delayed again. Said Daugherty promised clearance. I reminded him who holds the pen. The pen, the signature that made it all legal. Behind Harding's charm, his soothing voice and public goodwill, lived a man who governed not for people, but for profit. The money was funneled through banks in Cleveland and New York, offshore accounts in Panama and Switzerland, investment portfolios under assumed names, life insurance policies taken out on close friends and cabinet members, and, perhaps most chilling, anonymous real estate purchases in Miami, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. Entire neighborhoods bought with cash, their deeds sealed and shuffled between shadow corporations. By 1923, the Harding Network had siphoned the modern-day equivalent of over $200 million. And America never knew, because the press had been paid, the watchdogs had been muzzled, and the only man who tried to sound the alarm, Senator Thomas Walsh, was nearly discredited with a smear campaign involving fake witnesses and falsified bank records. Oil, black gold, the liquid fire that fueled the 20th century. Beneath deserts, farmlands, and coastlines, it was buried treasure. And in Warren G. Harding's America, it was the currency of corruption. The Teapot Dome wasn't just a scandal. It was a blueprint, a gateway, a foundation for something much larger, an empire of influence stretching from the halls of Washington to the oil fields of Wyoming and the vaults of Wall Street. After Harding's death, the press focused on the lease of naval oil reserves at Teapot Dome, Elk Hills, and Buena Vista. On the surface, it seemed simple. Government oil lands had been leased, illegally, to private oil companies without competitive bidding. But beneath that surface lay a tangled web of money, names, and manipulation. Let's untangle it. It begins with Albert B. Fall, Harding's Secretary of the Interior. He arranged the leases, but the deals didn't end there. Fall received $100,000 in cash from oilman Edward Doheny and another $300,000 in bonds and loans from Harry Sinclair, head of Mammoth Oil. But Fall wasn't greedy alone. He was the front man. What Harding's diary revealed, and what buried bank records now confirm, is that several men in Harding's inner circle, including the president himself, had financial stakes in those oil companies. How? Through shell companies, blind trusts, and something called bearer bonds, untraceable anonymous financial instruments that leave no paper trail except the ones you hide on purpose. In 1922, just months after the Teapot leases were signed, a private investment firm in New York received a $1 million capital infusion from a new silent investor. That firm later purchased stakes in multiple energy companies, including Sinclair's Mammoth Oil. That silent investor was traced to a company in Cleveland, a company co-owned by none other than Harding's campaign finance director, Elias Workman, the same man who orchestrated much of the Return to Normalcy campaign. Bank memos show Workman made a sizable deposit 3 weeks before the first lease was signed. More telling, he wrote a check from that same account to a charity run by Harding's wife, Florence. The circle tightens. This was more than favoritism. It was a money machine. Harding's administration leased federal land meant to supply oil to the U.S. Navy to his political allies. In return, those allies funneled profits through back channels, investment funds, and donation schemes right back to Harding's orbit. Some of that money was laundered through a so-called Veterans Relief Fund, a noble cause on paper. But documents recovered from a Cincinnati safe deposit box in 1987 show only 18% of that fund ever reached veterans. The rest? Divided among Harding's closest friends, including a man referred to in Harding's own journal simply as the banker. Who was the banker? His real name, Charles Dawes, U.S. Budget Director. Later, Vice President under Calvin Coolidge. That's right, the man responsible for managing the nation's money was also coordinating with oil executives on how to reinvest illicit funds to avoid scrutiny. Dawes never faced criminal charges. Neither did Hoover. Neither did Florence Harding. But they all benefited. The oil companies, they thrived. By 1925, Mammoth Oil had doubled its market share. Edward Doheny's company became a titan in Latin American drilling. And Fall, the scapegoat? He was the only cabinet member in U.S. history to serve time. 1 year in prison. But the money he received? Never fully recovered. And Harding? He died a rich man. His personal estate, unremarkable before the presidency, had ballooned. He left behind multiple properties, hidden investments, and silent stakes in businesses far beyond his means as a former senator. He once wrote in his diary, "No man gets to the top without owing debts. But it is the wise man who turns those debts into dividends." But the most shocking revelation didn't come from oil. It came from a letter found in a locked drawer of Harding's personal desk. A letter addressed not to a friend, but to an enemy. And what it contained changed everything we thought we knew about Harding's true legacy. Some truths die with their author. Others wait in silence for the right eyes to find them. The year was 1934. 11 years had passed since Harding's sudden death. America had moved on, from war, from scandal, from whispers of oil deals and hush money. His portrait still hung in federal buildings, a symbol of power lost too soon. But then, buried beneath papers in a forgotten drawer at the Library of Congress, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and brittle at the edges. It was addressed in Harding's handwriting. "To the one who outlives my name." No stamp, no return address, just that haunting sentence, and inside 3 pages of confession. What it revealed would rewrite history. The letter began with a strange line. "They will say I was blind." But no blind man builds a castle with so many hidden rooms. Harding was writing to someone, or something, not named. A historian? A future president? Himself? We'll never know. But what he left behind was chilling. In the first paragraph, he admits that the Teapot Dome leases were facilitated with full awareness. He names names, Fall, Sinclair, Doheny, and claims the deals were calculated efforts to repay debts owed during the campaign. Then he shifts tone. "There was a moment, late one night in 1922, when I looked at my hands and wondered how many men I had shaken, whose wealth I now carried in my pockets." He describes meeting with a foreign envoy from a European nation unnamed to discuss private trade agreements. Agreements that would benefit Harding's associates in exchange for favorable tariffs. He wrote, "I was a president not of people, but of men with silver pens and gold intentions." And then, the final page. Harding admits something deeper, something darker. He writes, "There are two kinds of corruption, the kind that takes money and the kind that sells out a soul. I committed both." He speaks of betrayal, of fear, of Florence. Who knows more than she ever says? And then this. "If ever these pages are read, I ask only this. Judge me not as a villain. Judge me as a warning." The letter was authenticated in 1999. Handwriting, ink, paper, all consistent. But it was never formally released to the public. It was catalogued, sealed, and stored. Because even in death, power protects its own. And yet, here we are, a century later, peeling back the curtain on a presidency built on oil, lies, and the careful choreography of corruption. Warren G. Harding was not the only corrupt president. He may not even be the worst, but he was the first to industrialize corruption, to systematize it, to turn the White House into a boardroom and government into business. In the end, Harding's story isn't just about one man. It's about how systems bend, how power attracts silence, how history often erases what it can't explain. But as long as we keep digging, keep asking, keep reading the letters never meant to be read, the truth will outlive the lies. And maybe, just maybe, we learn. Corruption hides in the past only if we let it. And sometimes, the past writes us letters we cannot ignore.